Hello, you may remember a few weeks ago I visited Wincy Willis and she gave us some expert advice on how to look after terrapins. Well, I've come back to Wincy's cottage today in the Durham countryside because she's going to be telling us how to look after something that looks very much like a terrapin, but it lives on dry land, and that's the tortoise. Wincy, welcome back to the programme.
Thank you.
Now tell me, where do tortoises come from?
Well, they come from Algeria, Yugoslavia, Morocco, Greece. The main source of supply that we receive now used to be Morocco, but now it's Algeria.
Now, how do they get here from those countries?
They're transported in refrigerated wagons, usually.
Is that okay for them to come like that?
No. It's a terrible form of transport. They're collected by natives in their own country, usually kept in pens for, could be several days, even weeks, without food and water, and then they're packed into baskets and put into this refrigerated truck and sent overland, usually for about 9 days it takes to get here.
Really? And what sort of state are they in when they arrive?
Awful. Just to give you an example, between 1965 and 1977, nearly 2.5 million tortoises were imported into this country, and nearly 90% of those died within the first year.
So if we want to look after a tortoise then as a pet, where can we get one from?
You can get one from a pet shop, but I would say that if you really care about tortoises, you wouldn't. You would try and find one that someone else has got sick of or wants to part with, wants to give to a good home, and then we're not perpetuating taking them from the wild.
Right, so if you can't find somebody, though, with
Yes.
a tortoise to spare, is there a best time of the year to go buy one from a pet shop?
Yes, early on in the year, the first arrivals would be the best because it gives them time to get acclimatised, for you to get used to them, find out their feeding habits, and generally make sure that they're in good health in time for hibernation.
So give us some idea with months about what...
They usually start appearing in May, and I would start looking then, straight away, and make sure that you get one that's in excellent health.
Are they expensive?
About £4.50. It can vary different parts of the country, but I would say £4.50 would be an average price.
Now, should you buy one or should you buy a pair?
No, I don't think you should ever keep one of anything. It's not natural. If you get one tortoise and it's a male, it will wander. As soon as it's time to mate, it'll go looking for a mate. If you get a pair, they're much likely to be happy and stay together.
Wincy, we're in your garden here and you've got a smashing shelter for them. What's this made of?
It's made of bales of straw and hay. Very, very warm, good insulation. They can just walk out of here first thing in the morning and be warmed up by the sunlight and then spend the rest of the day walking around the garden as long as it's warm enough.
You have to build it in any special direction?
Preferably facing where the sun rises in the east.
Right. You're going to explain to us how to look after them in detail. Shall we go inside to do that?
I think so, yes.
In the warm. Now, we've got 2 pairs of tortoises with us here. Do you think it's best to keep them in pairs?
Oh, absolutely, yes. It's cruel to keep anything by itself. It's not natural. It's much better. A male won't wander if he's got a mate with him.
Right. How do we establish male and female?
Well, it's different in different types of tortoises. These 2 are Hermann's tortoises and those 2 are spur-thighed tortoises, and we'll show you the difference. That's a male.
And shall I have some?
If you will, yeah. That's a male and that's a female. Now look, for a start, the male's shell goes in.
Right.
And the female's is flat. And the tails are completely different. The male's is much longer and it's got this sort of pointy piece on the end.
Yeah.
And the female's is much shorter and stubbier. And if you can go right round like that, there's a wider gap between there, and that enables her to lay her eggs. See, his shell comes over.
Right.
Wouldn't be able to lay eggs. So that's the way you tell on those 2.
These are the Hermann.
Hermann's tortoise, yes.
Hermann's tortoise.
Now these are called spur-thighed tortoises. And
Where are these from, incidentally?
Greece. This spur-thighed, you can tell because of this little piece here. Just a little sort of knobbly bit. That's the spur, right?
Right.
Now on these you can see the tail isn't as pronounced. It's not as long and pointy, but it is different. The male's got a much fatter, stubbier tail, and the female's got this tiny sort of tail. And again, space to lay her eggs, and not in the male, and the male's shell dips in, and the female's is flat.
Right.
Okay.
Okay, what do you need to look after them, Wincy? You need a large garden?
Not necessarily a large garden, but one that's well fenced in, because they're amazing escape artists that you wouldn't believe. When spring comes around and it gets warm and they're on the hunt, they'll be off. And people say tortoises are slow, but they're not. In my garden, I've looked sort of for one, couldn't find it, and within half an hour it's been halfway up the field. And they get out at the most amazing places. So the main thing is to fence it in really securely, and preferably with a brick wall, because if you've got wire, they climb up it and they get caught in it. But if it's a brick wall, they just give up. They try for a while and then they just sort of get to know the area they can walk in. Plenty of natural food growing in the area, but make sure that there are no poisonous plants. Things like buttercups are poisonous if they eat a lot of them. So I would eradicate all buttercups from a tortoise area. But lots of dandelions and clover and things like that.
And a shelter like the one we talked about?
Absolutely, yes. And of course, I live in the north of England, so we haven't got as much sunshine as the lucky people do in the south. So if you live in the north, you've got to bring your tortoises in if it gets too cold, and give them heat and warmth indoors to stimulate their eating and their natural activity.
What about if we live in a flat?
I honestly wouldn't recommend anyone who lives in a flat to keep a tortoise. I mean, it's for a start, there are no natural surfaces over which it can climb, and its claws soon become deformed. They need to wear down naturally on rocks and different types of land. And if it's just walking over a carpet or a lino all the time, it'll soon become deformed. Just really, you can't duplicate the wild at all living in a flat. So, unfortunately, I would say that people living in flats shouldn't keep them.
Food. Right. We're going to start with over here.
Yes. There's quite a selection here. The main thing that I would say about food is it's got to be fresh. If you think of a tortoise living in the wild, it picks its own food every day. It couldn't be fresher than that, straight out of the ground. So people might be kind and say, here, you can have this, it's going off, you can have it for the tortoises. I would say thank you and then put it in the bin. Because, to be honest, you just end up with more harm than good. So get plenty of fresh food. There's lots of variety here. There's lots of things that you can grow in your garden. I mean, you can grow that on a saucer in the windowsill, and that's very good.
That's what?
Mustard and cress. Then there's lettuce. Now, lettuce is the thing that everyone thinks, oh, yes, give a tortoise a lettuce leaf. But actually, lettuce isn't a very good food. It's quite nice to fill them up, but as a sort of food with lots of vitamins and minerals and things in it, hasn't got a lot. So it's okay to stimulate their appetite, but I wouldn't give them that alone. Lots of fresh fruit. You can peel bananas, slice bananas, pear, orange. Not many of them eat orange, but some of them do. Because they're all different, you know. They've all got different tastes. It's not one tortoise eats all that. Yes, exactly. Cucumber, again, a thing that lots of tortoises really, really like, but it hasn't got very much good in it.
Yeah.
Apple, tomatoes, and grapes.
It's food fit for a king here,
Absolutely. Cabbage, and then, you know when you've got cauliflower for Sunday lunch and you break off the outside leaves? Well, all those. Anything like that. Any natural sort of green leaves are the best.
Do you need to add anything to this marvellous collection of food?
Well, yes. To make it a completely balanced diet, we've got quite a few things here that you can add to the vegetables.
Shall we start with this?
Yes, that's calcium and vitamin powder, sort of thing that you buy in the pet shop. It's a thing that you give to cats having kittens and dogs having pups. And you just sprinkle it on wet lettuce. Say, just have a leaf like that, it's a bit damp, and just dash a bit over like that and shake off the spare. And then they're very sneaky tortoises, they know, so you've got to fold it up a bit, and when you're feeding them, so you just slip a little bit in. That's bone meal, same sort of thing. You can give it exactly the same way.
Buy that from a pet shop as well?
Yes, just cold bone meal in a tin. So nothing's fancy. These you probably recognise if you've got a budgerigar. It's cuttlefish bone.
Yeah.
And that's an excellent source of calcium, because of course tortoises need lots of calcium to keep their shell and their nails in good condition. So that's dead easy to feed. You just scrape it like that over the food, and it just coats the
very
food.
Sneaky, you know.
It is,
It's just
isn't
like
it?
my mum used to hide me sprouts underneath my mashed potatoes when I was younger.
Oh dear. Then this
Look at
that looks foul, but it's very good. It's seaweed, actually.
Right.
Dried seaweed, but it's got an awful lot of vitamins in it. So if you can get them to eat that, that's ever so good. And again, you can buy that in a pet shop. It's the sort of thing that they add to ordinary cats and dogs' diet if they've been a bit unwell and they need a boost. Now this must look quite strange. That's jam, ordinary jam, and I put that onto brown bread and hide things in that as well, because I've got some tortoises who really go mad on jam. And that is malt extract, the sort of thing that you give to babies and young children. And that's another thing that if you can get them to eat it. See, the main thing is variety, lots and lots of different things, and then you get them a balanced diet. And that is ordinary tin dog food. And quite a few of them will eat that and really enjoy it. I used to have one large male tortoise that used to practically fight the dog. He used to go in his dish for it. Yes, it's quite strong. And of course, on top of all this, one of the most important things for all animals is fresh, clean water. And tortoises are no exception. They like to bathe in it, so you need a shallow dish of fresh, clean water every day. And they'll sit in it for ages, and they dunk their heads right underneath and wipe their eyes and drink lots and lots.
Why do they do that? Why do they climb in the water?
I think it's probably, they don't realise they're doing it. You know, they sort of walk towards it and they put their heads in, and then the next minute they're in it. And once they're in it, and if it's warm, they just sit there and bathe.
Maybe you can answer me a question that I've always wanted to know the answer to. Can you tell the age of a tortoise from the markings on the shell?
Well, it's a bit of an old wives' tale, really. That there are scientific ways of aging a tortoise, but not by the markings on its shell. We've got two here, look. That one is this year's tortoise, and that one's 3 or 4 years old. I mean, where do you start?
Right. So it's an old wives' tale?
I would say so, yes.
And what about keeping the shells clean and things like that?
Well, that's very important, especially when they're outside during the day. I wouldn't put any fancy polish or anything on a shell at all. Warm water and a nice soft paper hanky. And just dip it in and just wipe them round. Make sure that their mouths are clean, their feet are clean because they get really clogged up in between their nails, and all the back end, because if you leave that dirty, flies laying eggs and they will eat away at the tortoise. So it's really important to make sure that they're absolutely clean. Just plain sort of tissue and warm water, and just wipe it sort of all round its shell, and make sure that the eyes and the mouth are quite clear.
You can wipe it round its eyes, can you?
Yes, be very careful. What happens with a tortoise, you see, is, perhaps if I show you in this one, it's a bit bigger, you can see. When they feed, they take food into their mouths, and then they push with their legs like that to pull the food apart. And all these little bits of skin flake off, and quite often they get in the tortoise's eye. So what you have to do is check, every day, check all your tortoises and make sure that they haven't got anything in their eyes. And if they have, be very, very gentle, just a very sort of wet, damp tissue, and just gently wipe it round its eye, and just keep going until you get the piece out. If it wedges in, take it to the vet. Don't mess about yourself.
Right.
One of the big problems on newly imported tortoises, they come into the country and they have ticks on them. These are horrible things that literally live on the skin, usually in the folds, and they dig into the flesh and they live on the blood of the tortoise. So if you find one on your tortoise, don't just pull it off, because you leave the bit that's dug into the skin inside. So what you need to do is get something like vinegar or methylated spirits, something that's quite strong like that, and drop it onto the tick, and eventually the tick will let go, and then you can make sure that it's off, and clean the wound thoroughly and put a little bit of antiseptic cream or something in, and that should be okay.
What diseases are they likely to contract if you don't keep them clean?
They can get cold, just like we do with a runny nose and everything. If you see a tortoise with a runny nose,
Give him a box of tissues.
The thing is to go to the vet straight away. Any problems like that, go straight to your vet, because if you waste time, it can mean the difference between your tortoise surviving and not. This little one is a prize example. It had a huge abscess on this side of its face here. I don't know whether you can see, but the mouth is slightly out of line. What happened was the abscess grew and grew and deformed the face completely, and a marvellous gentleman named Dr. Jackson did an operation on this tortoise, and now look at her, she's as fit as a fiddle.
And if you look after them properly, how long will they live?
The expected lifespan in the wild is about 50 years, but there are lots of cases of tortoises recorded in captivity living quite a lot longer than that. But 50 years should be the span.
Well, a little story of the vicar you were telling me about.
Oh yes, there's a wonderful book, very old book. It's a diary based on Timothy the tortoise that a vicar had, and kept it for ever so many years, and kept its life story every day.
And how old did that live to?
I think it was something like 80 years old. Amazing.
It's quite old then,
yes,
really.
Yes.
So that's why, obviously, you should go for a tortoise that someone's already got.
Yes.
If they live so long.
Yes, why not? You know, you can pass it down from father to son. You can have the inherited tortoise in the family.
Now, what happens in the cold weather? Because our winters here in this country are very, very cold, aren't they?
Yes, they are. And where the tortoises come from, it goes quite cold. What we do is hibernate tortoises. Now, this is a sort of sleep, but it's much more deep than a normal sleep. Their whole body process slows down completely so that they don't use up all the food stores and everything that they would in a normal day. So the main thing is, before you hibernate a tortoise, you've got to make sure that it's healthy and that it's quite heavy in weight so that it can last the whole winter without eating anything. And of course, if you've got a tortoise like these two, I wouldn't hibernate them at all. They're too small. They need to be about 4 or 5 before they hibernate safely. So I would keep these awake all winter. I set them up in a large tank with a bulb to keep them warm and feed them just normally.
He's off.
Yes, very fit, this one. So now, if we were hibernating a tortoise, we would have a box that... Shall I put these down?
Yes. Do you want me to pass the box
I think we're going to, yes, please. We're going to lose this little one. Now, the main thing about this box is that it's proof against all rodents, mice, rats and things like that. Because what happens is, it's quite horrible. In the winter, you box up your tortoise and you put it out in the garage or whatever, and you go in the spring and open the box and you find an empty shell. Rats and things like that are very hungry will go and actually eat the tortoise while it's alive. So this is a solid wooden box.
Wincy, what are the holes for in the top of the box?
Well, it's important that the tortoise can breathe. Even though it's sleeping in a much deeper state than normal, it's still breathing. However slowly, it still needs the fresh air. So we've got the box, we've got the tortoise inside, plenty of dry, clean straw. Seal it up, and now you want to put it in somewhere that hasn't got any form of heating, so that it stays quite cool right throughout the winter, and when spring warms up, the tortoise warms up naturally. And if you're putting it in the garage, for example, make sure that you don't stand it where your dad pulls in the car every day and the exhaust fumes gas the tortoise, because that's been done quite a few times, believe you me.
The garage is a good place to put it, isn't it?
Well, as long as you haven't got a heated garage, yes. Or a shed outside, somewhere where it's just not going to get artificial heat.
Wincy, thank you very much indeed. But I think before we finish, we should let Wincy recap on some of the important points we've talked about today. So let's think about what we've talked about. Right at the beginning.
Right at the beginning, the shelter.
Right.
And an area of ground with different types of habitat.
Yeah.
Then food. Fresh food, big a variety as possible. Temperature.
Plenty of fresh water.
Plenty of fresh water, you keep me right. Temperature. If they haven't got enough heat, they're not going to be able to digest the food that you give them. So that is very, very critical. Then make sure that you regularly check how much they weigh. And as long as they're increasing in weight, then they'll be okay to go into hibernation.
Right.
And a proper hibernation in a good, adequate box. And make sure that you
plenty of straw inside.
Plenty of straw inside, and keep the tortoises absolutely clean.
So if you remember those points, you should have a very healthy tortoise that lived for many years. Well, that's it for this week, but I'll see you next week on the programme. Bye-bye.